I get asked often enough when I open it up for just general questions about writer's block and how I deal with writer's block that I thought I'd just spend my broadcast today just talking about writer's block and how I deal with writer's block, and then we can open it up for questions about that. But I know that the one thing, when I go on Twitter and I follow these various writers and writers groups and everything, the one thing that's the most irritating thing to me, the most irritating piece of advice that I see is just write. Okay? Just write. Just sit your butt in the chair and write. Because sometimes you sit your butt in the chair to write and nothing comes. It's like, yeah, that's really easy for you to say, is what I want to say to people. That's really easy for you to say. Just sit your butt in the chair and write. It's like, that advice doesn't always work. I'm going to tell you some things that have worked for me in the past, and hopefully you'll find them helpful for you. A long time ago, several years ago, Bonnie Gillespie introduced me to Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. And I started reading it and doing the exercises in it. And one of the things that Julia talks about in the book is doing morning pages. There's a lot of other great stuff in the book besides the morning pages, but that really resonated with me, doing those morning pages. And I started doing it. And I did it, and I did it, and I did it, and I did it. And it was awesome. Awesome for me. And it opened my writing up, and I just started writing like crazy, and it was an awesome way to unstick myself as a writer at the time. And then I injured my back, I ruptured a disc, I was flat on my back for weeks, and I stopped. And somehow I never got back to it. And I started writing again, and I don't know, it wasn't as easy as it was before, and I'd completely forgotten about the morning pages until I started following Brian Koppelman's podcast, The Moment. And he's really awesome. He's a writer and a producer and a director too. And he started talking about the morning pages. And I was like, the morning pages. What happened to me? Why did I stop doing the morning pages? So I picked up my notebook, which was still sitting next to my bed. Hello. But there was like other stuff sort of piled on top of it. So I dug under my stuff, and there's the notebook. Had the date on it, because I'd put the dates on the front of the notebooks when I would start them and how long they would last and when would be the last date, and then I'd stick them, file them away. And I went and looked at the last date on there, and darn if it wasn't the day before I ruptured my disc. And I was like, holy crap, it's been that long since I've done the morning pages. I need to get started again. And I started doing the morning pages, and I cannot tell you, my whole career started opening up. Not just writing, which was awesome, but my whole career started opening up. All these opportunities. I started thinking of all these things. Well, what if I did this? Well, what if I did this? Maybe I suddenly things started flowing out of the morning pages. All this inspiration. I could do this. I could do that. I had this project, that project. Stuff was flying out of my brain into the morning pages and then suddenly into my life, which was really awesome. And I'm so glad I started doing it again. And I've been telling Brian, you restarted my life with the morning pages. So I cannot recommend the morning pages enough. I cannot recommend that book enough. It is an awesome book. So if you're a writer and if you feel stuck and if you aren't doing this, it's a really awesome thing. Number one, it just is like a brain dump every morning. You get out whatever it is that's on your mind, whatever is bothering you, whatever you are thinking about that you can't, that you're wrestling with, that you can't quite get your mind around, that somebody you're upset with or some situation that you can't quite work out. As you start just writing, it somehow works itself out through the pages. It just somehow flows out, and then you're like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. oh, that's what that's all about. Oh, that's what that means. And it's like, it just flows. Sometimes it's about projects, sometimes it's about personal life, sometimes it's about deep psychological things. I sort of don't judge, I just write. And sometimes I pay attention to what I'm writing, and sometimes I pay no attention to what I'm writing. It sort of doesn't matter, because what it does is it gets you into a flow. It gets you to start writing without judgment, just writing. It flows. It gets you to stop your critical part of your brain, which is what's stopping you from writing in the first place. And it gets you to just spew stuff out onto the page, which is what you really need to be doing when you're writing. You need to get into that flow state so that you just write. Now that's the first thing that I have used most recently to help me unblock and not be in that writer's block. The other thing that I use goes back a little further than that, and that is I was part of a repertory company some years back. And this repertory company was for actors primarily, and it was for film and television. It was not a theater repertory company, which is very unusual. They called themselves it's not around anymore, unfortunately. They called themselves the New Hollywood Studio System. And I came in as an actor, like everybody else did. I originally came to LA to pursue a career as an actor. And the guy who ran the thing saw something in me. And he said, I think you should learn how to produce and to write and direct. And I was like, oh, no, that whole idea scared the shit out of me. and I was like, I don't think so. And he's like, yeah, I think so. You should start doing this. This was back way before YouTube, and the internet was like a big thing. There was no streaming video. None of this stuff. It wasn't like a thing that people are doing. People are doing that now, and it's like a thing that everybody does. It's almost considered, you're almost considered like behind the times if you're not writing or directing or producing your own stuff if you're an actor. Back then, you almost had to be quiet about it. People thought you were weird, and there was something wrong with you if you were producing or writing or directing your own stuff. But he basically said, look, if you want to create more work for yourself as an actress, the best way to do that is to produce your own work. And if you write and direct, even better, because you can write stuff for yourself and you can direct your own projects. Okay, so I started learning under his mentorship how to do all of that. And then I started working for the company and actually writing and directing projects for the actors. Now, it was a very unique situation. The actors would come in, they would get branded, although we didn't call it branding in those days. We called it determining what their signature was, which I think is kind of a unique and interesting term, because your signature is so specific to you that no one else can do your signature. When someone tries to do your signature, they call it a forgery. All right? That's how specific your signature is to you. And when an actor would come in, we would determine what that very specific thing was that they had that nobody else had. And so when two actors would sit down in front of me and I would write a 30-minute piece for them, and I didn't write it all 30 minutes in 1 hour, that would have been crazy. They would come in every hour on the hour, sometimes, 3, 4, 5 hours in a row in a day, and they'd sit there with their pads of paper and their pens and their expectant little looks on their faces, and they're expecting me to write right then something brilliant. And I had to write right then, something brilliant, or something, even if it wasn't brilliant, all right? And I had to actually just learn how to write on demand. And every hour on the hour, they came in with their little pads and their little pens, ready to go, and I had to write. But because I was writing for a very specific character, two characters, in a situation, in a scene, in a scenario with each other, it wasn't that difficult to start. It was like, well, this is what this character would say. This is the first thing that would come out of their mouth. And this is the way they would say it. And if this character says this, then this character would say that in response to it. And then we're off and running. Because the minute you write the first two lines of dialogue, you go. It's like, boom, it's there. It starts, it's like momentum starts almost all by itself. So my next piece of advice is, if you know your characters that well, then you can determine as a writer what is the next thing they're going to say, or what is the first thing they're going to say or do. You know, based on that character, what they're going to do specifically, or what they're going to say specifically. So write it. Write that very first thing. And then, because you've written that thing, the next thing that happens, because they've said that or because they've done that, is like, oh, yeah, of course that's going to happen as a result of that. Of course that's going to be that's going to be the reaction of the people in the room or the other person in the scene, because he said that or she said that. Of course that's going to be what happens because of that. It almost helps. I mean, it doesn't write itself, but it gets you going. And of course, the only thing you need to do when you're feeling stuck is to get going. Whether what you write is awesome or not doesn't matter, because you're going to make it awesome in the rewrite. So you don't turn that critical part off and just write the first thing that person would do. And sometimes that works too, just taking a break and then coming back to it fresh. So those are the two things that have worked the best for me, as opposed to people just saying, well, just sit down and write. Just sit down and write something. It's like, well, just sit down and write something doesn't work for me. But when I sit down and start thinking about my next film, I'm primarily a film writer. When I start thinking about my characters first, and I always have a specific actor in mind, whether they're well-known or not well-known, if it's a star or just some actor or some person, actor friend of mine that I know, I always have an actor in mind who's going to play that role. Now, doesn't mean that's the actor who ends up playing that role, but I always have a specific actor in mind for the role